So, I think it's really interesting that towards the end of Patrick's talk, he kind of posted the slide on how to start. And really, I think that's a salient point. Really, what we're doing today is we're starting. This is the 1970s. And one of the things that I think a lot of organizations forget is that in order for these AI models that we're building today to be useful within the organization, there's a heavy dependence on data. If the models can't access the contextual data that runs your business, then the model is not going to be useful, right? And so what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is how data will help shape the future of dental care. So the way that we see images at SOTA Cloud is basically the fundamental objective ground truth artifact that's produced through the clinical process. Basically, every other piece of data that you collect throughout your organization is subjective data. It's data that's input by a person, that's interpretive. And the clinical images come through as really the objective ground truth. And so from that perspective, with the images being the only objective ground truth coming out of that kind of clinical pipeline, there's a lot of systems that depend on that data. And so we take the philosophy that that data needs to remain open, accessible, and easy to use for all of the other components that run your business. And so I want to talk briefly about who needs access to that data in your imaging system. And I know you can't read any of the text on the slide today. That's OK. It's because there's so many different people within your organization and systems within your organization that depend on that data that it's actually a little bit overwhelming. And it's kind of a funny scenario that we find ourselves in. Historically in dental, there's been a lot of problems around access to images. It's really interesting today. We've got Overjet represented here. SOTA Cloud's also partnered with Pearl, NVIDIA. And we have some other announcements coming shortly for other AI vendors that are really needing access to this data. But if you talk to any of these companies, you'll learn that actually when they got started, it was kind of trench warfare to make these systems work with all of the imaging providers that are in the market today. And a big reason for that is that these systems are ultra proprietary. They are locking you out of your own data. And fundamentally, for your RCM teams, for your different care teams within the organization, for basically every element of the business, there's this kind of challenge of how do you move the data around? If you have to do a referral, is the file format the right type? All of these problems. And so as we move forward into kind of the horizon of the AI future, there's this question of kind of agentics, right? We're going into agentics. And so in order for you to, as Patrick mentioned, kind of offload and build this efficiency within your organization, it's critical that those kind of future agentic models be able to use the data within your org. And so I want to highlight really quickly, where we are today in dentistry with AI is kind of the first generation for as it pertains to the way that we use your imaging data. And that's that we have these really good clinical pathology detecting models. So you've got Pearl, you've got Overjet, you've got NVIDIA, and a kind of a swarm of other companies that are coming up to try to tackle this problem. But these are all kind of reactive in nature, and they're beneficial in the clinical workflow. But they're not really kind of taking away from a lot of the other effort that your organization has to use in order to kind of build efficiency, which Patrick kind of asked about how you define that. The way that I look at that is really value over effort. How are you getting value out of the systems that you're using, and how much effort are you putting into using those systems? And as we kind of get into this next horizon, I think just as an example, one of the key problems that we can kind of help to solve is RCM, right? Revenue claims management. Simple things like attaching an image to a claim. That's like one of the biggest problems that we have from an operational perspective, and it's so trivial. It's like, right now what a lot of organizations are doing is they're going into a system and they're taking a screenshot and then they're pasting that into their claims provider. And it's like, that task is such a simple task to automate from a technology perspective, and yet we haven't really cracked that nut. And the reason for that, I think, is like data accessibility, right? That's why we have to do things like take screenshots. And so where we are today with SOTA is we've integrated with virtually every practice management company on the market today in some way, shape, or form. We natively work with every X-ray sensor, most of the panoramic machines without using Twains. We work with all the cameras on the market. We work now with all the CBCT systems. And we have a robust library of APIs that are available so that you, as a DSO, and all of the partners that you want to work with to help operationalize and automate against your imaging systems for your business can consume those APIs, and the technology providers that you're working with can also consume those APIs. And what that means is that you're now kind of unlocked in your ability to fully automate and take advantage of that kind of agentic future as the technology becomes available. And speaking to the problem that we had about kind of the locked-in nature and the current state of the dinosaurs in the imaging market in dentistry, you're going to be hard-pressed to find another solution on the market today that does that. Actually, most of them are purposefully putting blockers on the data by using proprietary Huffman encoding methods on the way that they write the images to your disk. So if you've ever used Dexis, for example, and you look at a Dex file, like try to decode that. You can't. And there's a reason. They want to lock you into that system. So we take the opposite approach. We want you to have access to your data. We want you to be able to use the data in a way that benefits your business. We want to make sure that we have APIs available that make that not just simple, but efficient and fast. And we want you to be able to take the data actually even and bring it into a data warehouse or a data lake within your organization, put it alongside your practice management data, and then really build that into kind of the core of the way that you analyze the way your business is running. And so kind of getting back to the next horizon here, that's just the beginning, right? One of the other things that's really critical, especially as your DSOs grow and kind of automate around things is, the equipment is the #1 capital expenditure that you have in your organization. The actual X-ray sensors, CBCT machines, panoramic machines, cameras, if you add all of that up, that's where you spend the bulk of your capital from an equipment perspective. And so tracking the health of that is really important. Making sure that your IT teams are operating efficiently or your MSP partners are able to help solve your problems is really important. That's where you're spending a lot of your time and money and resources as operatories that are down on imaging equipment. So even that data is valuable. There's a huge slew of metadata that comes out of this key clinical process that nobody can take advantage of today. And so kind of looking forward past the agentic piece, the kind of really interesting future about this is that all of this data is eventually going to come together into more unified multimodal models. And basically what that means is that if you look towards some of the leaders in this area like PDS Health, what they're doing is they're actually taking the CBCT data, the imaging data, and Steve Thorne talks about this all the time, and they're bringing that into kind of alignment with each other so they can start drawing some interesting conclusions about how our oral care links to our overall body care. And so, moving forward, the data that you create through these key clinical processes in your organization is going to increasingly become the most valuable parts of your companies. So choosing a provider, working with partners that have the philosophy of giving you the ability to use that data is going to be more important than ever now as we are starting down this road of moving towards that kind of interesting future where AI, takes over everything. We're not there yet today. I think eventually we're going to get there. But you're going to make decisions now in terms of the way that you're generating the data today so that in 5 or 10 years you can use the data. And if you don't start making those choices now, that adoption for you later is going to become very difficult because you're going to have basically missing years of contextual data that you can't use when the opportunity to use it is available. And so just to kind of recap here, from the perspective of unlocking that access for you, we give you the APIs to get your images. We give you the APIs to get all of the other metadata associated with the images, including the devices and everything else that were used in the generation of that data. We give you your staff performance, the time that it takes for them to go from the first X-ray in an exam to the last X-ray in an exam, so that you know how quickly they're repositioning in the mouth. We give you the information that you need in order to pick your digital device vendors, right? So if you want to know, for example, when we saw an X-ray sensor for the first time versus when that device went out of commission, so that you can make more intelligent, business decisions around who you're working with from an equipment perspective, having access to that data allows you to do that, okay? In addition to that, we have everything that you could need from an IT security perspective. As Patrick mentioned, when you have to unlock all of this data, you need to have a way to actually moderate access to it. And so things like hierarchical access control with a full RBAC permissioning system, SCIM, so that you can provision your users easily across the organization as you're onboarding. Some of you folks have a few hundred offices. Well, you have thousands of employees. How are you actually going to deploy a system? We make it easy and automated for you through the use of standards like SCIM. Complete compliance audit logging across the organization. Everything that you do within the system is tracked. Everything that you do over API is tracked. And so you're compliant the whole time. And then finally, because we're tying all of the different parts of the system together from the ground truth, which is the acquisition process, every time that you take an X-ray, a camera image, a pano, a CBCT, and now even including 3D scans, you can bring those into the system. We're creating a unified record set that you can operate against. And just recently, actually, we added the ability for patient files as well. And so if you're using us as a file system, kind of like Dropbox for dentistry, basically, all of that's also unlocked over API. And so it makes it very easy as a kind of a one-stop solution for you to actualize the value of your data. So just to close, I want to reiterate, the future of imaging is open. Today, that is not the case. The vast majority of providers are locking you in. When you sign up for a new system, I do recommend you consider that. And one thing to remember about kind of where we are today, being in the 1970s, I like to kind of harken back to the early 90s when we saw, Alta Vista and Ask Jeeves and InfoSeek and all of these early search engines. None of them exist anymore today. But at the time, if you were using Alta Vista, if you were using Ask Jeeves, you thought that, man, this is the greatest thing in the world. These guys are going to be around forever. And so, even when you're looking at the vendors that you're operating with today, there's no guarantee that these things are going to be around forever, because ultimately what happens is Google comes in and crushes everybody, right? And you want to make sure that, when the Google appears, if that happens, the data that you need to be able to use to work with the kind of, the dental AI kind of, metaphor for Google, whoever that ends up being, that data is available for you to do so. Okay. So thank you for that time today. I appreciate it. And yeah, let's partner up. We're in the corner over here. We can walk you through some of how SOTA Cloud can benefit your business.
Thanks, Dustin. Let's give him a hand.